Welcome to Live with Marketers, our award-winning LinkedIn Live broadcast series exploring industry trends and future-forward views of the marketing landscape with some of the brightest minds in the B2B arena. I'm your host, Alex Rin, Senior Content Marketing Manager at LinkedIn, and I'm excited to be broadcasting to you today from San Francisco. Thanks for joining today's episode, which explores new B2B customer engagement strategies in this new normal that we all find ourselves in. Now at US companies of various sizes and in different industries, B leaders know that customers are facing economic uncertainty and pressure to preserve cash, but customers are still seeking unexpected opportunities to strengthen their position, as they should. And then our new LinkedIn Edelman collaborative survey of nearly 400 B2B executives in the US highlights the state of decision-making and strategic opportunity in the new COVID environment. It builds on our 3-year collaboration with Edelman, exploring thought leadership in the B2B space to assess how executives are responding to the pandemic and what this means for strategic decision-making. So on to our agenda during this episode, we will explore how decision-making has changed. We'll outline 5 new B2B customer engagement strategies that you can implement today. We'll double down a little bit on the importance of thought leadership, and then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So please, as we go through the episode, if you have questions, please drop them in the comments. And then one last housekeeping note at the very end, if you're joining via Slido, we have a super short survey as we're always looking to improve and ensure that we're hosting conversations that matter most to your business. Now it's time to introduce our guests. Today I have with me Tusar Barrick, Agency and Channel Partner Lead at LinkedIn, and Joe Kingsbury, US Managing Director for Edelman Business Marketing. Now, I'd love for both of you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, and as is custom here at LinkedIn, share something that's not on your LinkedIn profile. So, Joe, we'll begin with you.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, I'm Joe Kingsbury, U.S. Managing Director, and I lead Edelman Business Marketing, which is the practice within Edelman that specializes in integrated B2B communications. And so typically when we support clients, that involves some combination of thought leadership, content marketing, including advisory on the marketing technology stack, as well as demand generation. In terms of one thing that's not on my LinkedIn profile, I am actually a lifelong and diehard New England Patriots fan. I have learned over time that depending on who you're talking to, this doesn't always go over that well. So it's not something that I talk about that often.
I feel like Tusar is going to have some opinions on that one. Thank you for your honesty, Tusar. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to let everyone know I've known Joe for over 30 years now. This is the first time he's told me this, so we're going to have to rethink this partnership and collaboration that we've had for a while. But no, in all seriousness, very excited to be here. Thank you, Alex, for having us. I've always wanted to be on Live with Marketers, so I'm super excited to actually get the opportunity. And so, as Alex mentioned, my name is Tusar Barrick. I run marketing for our agency and partner business here at LinkedIn. And this, it's really exciting to be here to talk about all the research we've done over the past 3 years. But I guess getting back to something not on my LinkedIn profile, I was actually looking at the mail the other day. And so United started sending the magazines that are typically in the back of the seat in front of you out to customers because people just aren't traveling right now. So I received in the mail, and it made me realize, and it made me think about missing travel, and also made me realize that it's now been over 13 years that I've had some form of status on United, 13 years in a row. Before it was United when it was Continental, up till now through the merger, I've had that status. So that's not on my LinkedIn profile, is the 13 plus years in a row of United status, which I hopefully can maintain going forward. But we'll see how the travel restrictions take place over the next year.
Yeah, that is funny. I too am in a relationship with United that is long-standing, and that we've come too far and learned too much together for me to go back. But
exactly.
All right, so we'd like to kick off the episode by learning a little bit more about you, our audience. So let's begin with a question about thought leadership. The question is, how would you rate your thought leadership strategy? A, great, B, good, C, fair, or D, non-existent. And we'll give you a couple of seconds to respond. If you are on the Slido platform, feel free to vote there. If you're just on LinkedIn Live, feel free to enter your responses in the comments, and we will give a couple seconds. Do we have any predictions, Joe and Tusar, about what the responses are going to be like?
I'd say I'd probably guess fair. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
I agree. Somewhere between fair and good. I think most people will land in that area.
Yeah, we'll see if our 3 years of researching holds true in this poll. Hopefully it does. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, so let's take a look here. In the poll, we actually have, so fair is the leading response right now with 38%, actually 40%, sorry, it's live, 40%, and then good is the next runner up. So glad to hear that a lot of people feel as though they have a good thought leadership. If you do have a fair thought leadership and you're still building it, then we're really glad you're here, because we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. But to start off, I think it would be helpful for our audience if you two could share a bit of context around the LinkedIn Edelman collaboration and how you chose to focus on and why.
Yeah, sure. I can maybe start, and Joe, feel free to jump in. But I think it's important to set the context a little bit of this research that we've done. So for about 3 years in a row, we've been trying to understand the impact thought leadership has in B2B marketing and sales. It all started because we felt that there wasn't a ton of great research to understand the impact at that time when we started it on thought leadership. And everyone thought of it to some degree as something I need to do in B2B marketing. It's content I create, but it's really just that upper funnel at best, thinking about how the brand building kind of happens, or potentially something later on where it's a lead gen where you have a gated content. But we wanted to think about how people really thought about that. And so one of the first things we actually saw is what you're seeing now is this idea that decision makers are really craving thought leadership. And what that means is when we looked at and surveyed people on how much time they spent on thought leadership, every year we thought there'd be a decent amount, but it was a large amount. So almost 50%, as you can see here, spend at least an hour a week on thought leadership and getting it and enjoying it and trying to learn from it. And what we even saw, it's even more surprising as you go further down, almost 17 to 18% spent 4 hours plus a week. And so what we realized was that there was this craving and this appetite for thought leadership and making sure that quality existed to help people. But what we wanted to know was, how do we take that a step further? Is there a way that we can see what type of, when we have quality content, does it have some sort of influence and tangible sales influence? And so what we wanted to find out was, beyond just people consuming it, how does it impact whether you're at the beginning of the funnel, where it's really just awareness, all the way through selling and cross-selling. And so our hypothesis was that it did, but we just weren't sure how it quantified. And we did think it'd be a lot more in the beginning. What we were surprised to see, and it's consistent year over year, is that it really has an impact across the board. Whether you're in the beginning with consideration and just trying to generate RFPs, it had an impact, but all the way through actual purchase, through upselling, and even through cross-selling with your existing customers. So there's a need for a thought leadership, not just to build awareness outside of those who are using your product, but even within those that are using your product or services, to try to get more out of it. And it's having an impact on decision makers as they think through. It relates back to this idea that I think it was a Harvard Business Review that I read, where about 60% of the time spent to evaluate products and services is done before ever reaching out to a vendor. So being part of that consideration, you need to have thought leadership that really has the ability to have an impact on helping people get better at their job. And when we say thought leadership for definition purposes, it's not a sell sheet. It's a matter of talking about a topic in your industry that you feel your audience can have some sort of impact. And so it was quite interesting to see that impact that it had across the sales funnel.
Yeah, absolutely agree that thought leadership is essential. Joe, do you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say that we're finding that this topic about the impact of thought leadership on client relationship building, on generating demand, it's actually even more relevant than ever. In fact, I think just recently McKinsey put out some data talking about this, sort of the new normal you alluded to because of the pandemic and how everything has become sort of much more driven by digital content, obviously virtual interactions as physical trade shows have gone away and such. And so it just feels like this topic we've been studying for a few years now has really been magnified. And in terms of what you're seeing here, this is kind of an interesting data point that we wanted to share with you guys, which is that in addition to what Tusar talked about, which is the influence of thought leadership on decision maker buyer behavior, not only at the top of the funnel but all the way throughout the entire customer journey. What we also found is that there was a pretty big disconnect in terms of how the different audiences that we interviewed actually felt about the potential impact of thought leadership. So what you see is that the actual buyers, actual B2B decision makers tend to rate the influence of thought leadership on their own behavior much higher than even salespeople at B2B companies, and even higher than this other group called the producers of thought leadership content. And that group includes marketers, public relations professionals, basically content creators. And so we just find it strange that the actual sort of groups that create all of this content tend to rate the impact much lower across the board than even the target audience of that content. And our hunch is that it has something to do with sort of a challenge around attribution overall, because we also found in our study that only about 17% of thought leadership producers, again, the marketers and the communicators, have a sort of consistent and reliable way of tying their activity back into sort of bottom line impact.
Yeah, it's funny, and I think, Alex, that's why we thought it was fair or good in that poll, right? That slide right there. It just kind of shows that, this audience of marketers who's listening right now, in general, don't realize the impact of the work that they're doing. And so seeing that year over year, how we saw the impact it has, but not being able to realize it, and the attribution point that Joe made, it's something that stuck out to us and continues to stick out to us.
Yeah, and not being able to having troubles measuring it, and then not being able to kind of like make the case for it when a lot of marketers being held to short-term lead generation goals. Exactly. Totally get that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And it's amazing to see the impact across the customer journey. But something that I've learned as a content marketer is that quality content and quality thought leadership specifically does take time, and you shouldn't just put something out there for the sake of having something out there. So what are the risks, if any, of potentially rushing the process and putting something out there just to check a box?
Yeah, so we think this is a pretty interesting angle on the topic, but what we found is that when the content is what the target audience considers to be very low quality, there's a very tangible risk in that, not only to reputation, but actually tangible negative risk on generating demand, and on sort of the overall client relationship throughout the journey. And so, the B2B buyers that we surveyed, only 15% of them would rate the thought leadership content that they read as being very good or excellent. Only 29% said that they can reliably gain valuable insight from the content that they're seeing brands publish. And here's actually where it gets sort of a little bit more dire, actually, is that a full 38% of buyers said that their respect and admiration for that organization producing the low quality content, that it's actually decreased. And then 27% of those buyers said that poor quality thought leadership content has actually led them to decide to not award a piece of business to an organization. So, I guess depending on how you look at this, it really, it can be a challenge or it can be a motivator as well, which is to say that, this kind of work, when it's done well, absolutely has tangible impact. So it's important to know where quality factors in.
Absolutely. So how can we make sure that we are creating quality thought leadership content? And maybe like a twofold part of the question would be, how does one cultivate a culture of thought leadership within a company?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time thinking about that in our last survey we did to understand the impact it had, but also like how do you develop this culture, right? And how do you create the quality? I think there's like three main factors I'd say that dig into how it's created, which is one, just support from above, right? Support from leadership is really important. Understanding that from the top down, there's a want and a need that these longer term objectives of thought leadership will help the company, will help its positioning, will help its stance in the industry, along with driving sales in the short and long term. But to do that, you need to make sure that the second piece is around critical thinking. Ultimately, the people who consumed the thought leadership, the decision makers that were using it, were really using it for a couple key factors. But fundamentally, it was to help make them better at their job. It was to help them understand, how can I be better at what I'm doing? How can it help me make decisions? And also, with things that are timely and top of mind, like what are the underlying factors? What are our hypothesis on the underlying factors causing the situation we're in was really important to them. And then the third piece might sound a little obvious, but it's a matter of distribution and promotion. So as good thought leadership as you have to make sure you have a distribution strategy, whether that be through organic, paid, some mix, working with people in your team to promote it and get it out there is really important. And that goes back to that first point around that support from leadership, because you want it to come out from the company, but you also want to make sure that the leaders within your organization are pushing it out there, or being a human voice, if you will, of the content that's kind of coming out.
Yeah, and I would just kind of build on that and point out that, look, at the end of the day, this is all about having a really good knowledge and understanding of the customer and what they need to be successful. And so, brands should really be thinking about, what are the best ways that we can truly add valuable knowledge to a conversation, or deliver knowledge on a topic that's going to help give our clients an advantage. And some of the other things that really kind of came to the surface in our study was that buyers said that they're not interested when brands are merely repeating what everyone else is already saying. So it's not really enough to just say, hey, here's a trend that's going on in the industry. You really need to, just as one example, really push it a little bit further and make sure that your insights are, not just superficial, but can illuminate sort of, not just the trend, but why is that happening? What's the implication for your business? And so, that type of thinking we found is especially valuable to senior level decision makers.
Okay, great. And you talked a little bit about distribution. I know that a lot of marketers are strapped for time. So what would you say is the right time allocation of creating thought leadership content versus distributing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. We get it a lot. It's hard to give an exact time spent or effort and resource spent, because I think fundamentally, like, this idea of content being the key and the foundation is important. So I'd spend a decent chunk of time to make sure that you understand your audience, that you understand your market and what they're looking for, and making sure that you're developing something. We'll go through, I think, later on about this framework we've developed to help actually think about how to create thought leadership. So that's an important aspect. I would say you want to spend, it's probably like a 50-50, 60-40 split of how you think about spending time on creating content and then actually getting it out there, right? I think the hard part is actually the beginning of making sure that you're building something that will be seen of value to the audience that you're creating it for, and making sure that it has something that's long lasting too, right? What ends up happening a lot within organizations, I think, Alex, you and I could talk about this for hours, like, it's at times we'll hear people wanting something new all the time, but you don't always need to make something new. It's a matter of making sure you build out something that's strong, can last. And also remember that just because you're talking about it all the time doesn't mean that your whole audience is hearing it all the time. And it takes time to get that distribution attribution factor out there. So it's important to remember. And then the other key thing is building on like developing a brand. It's right. It's making sure that you have something that you can build on as opposed to building something net new. So things like this report, the fact that we've done it for 3 years, it's important to us to keep building onto it, build on our foundations, but be able to provide new information, or even things like this show, right? Live with Marketers. It works well because it's a solid brand that's helping people and thinking of new aspects of it, but it's got that brand presence there.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the compliment, Tushar. I will take it.
Of course.
Okay, so we know thought leadership is important. We know that decision makers are craving it. We know that marketers aren't thinking as highly of their thought leadership as maybe they should be. Let's talk a little bit briefly about some of the other benefits of thought leadership before we talk about the new B2B customer mindset. Joe, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that probably the headline for people who aren't familiar with the study is that beyond generating sort of brand awareness in the marketplace, and even beyond sort of building and burnishing a reputation that's positive for the company, what we found in the study is that a lot of these buyers, or in fact, like nearly 60% of the buyers, said that they're really turning to this type of content to understand the capabilities of the company that's producing it. And so, they tell us that this kind of content is a better way of actually evaluating the capabilities, the strategic thinking, the ability to partner, those sorts of attributes. That thought leadership content is even better in that regard than sort of typical marketing materials like Tushar mentioned, product sheets and the like. Just getting down into the nitty gritty, some of the benefits are sort of increased rates in actually generating inbound RFPs. And notably, those are RFPs where the company in question was actually not originally in the consideration set. And then, as we kind of briefly touched upon before, being directly responsible for contributing to actual revenue wins, as well as some of the really positive customer behaviors even after purchase. So being more inclined to sort of be open to like cross-selling and upselling of existing capabilities.
Yep, certainly. And I just wanted to remind everyone that we are taking questions at the end. So please feel free to continue to input your questions into the comments, and we'll get to them at the end. All right, so moving on, given the COVID environment and based on your latest research, looking at the current state of the B2B customer, how would you describe the new B2B customer mindset?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of kick that off, and Tushar definitely chime in. But Alex, as you mentioned, one of the things we wanted to do, kind of given how crazy things have been this year, and some of the challenges that many B2B companies are facing, is to really get sort of a timely pulse on the state of basically B2B marketing and what companies are learning about their buyers, from their buyers, during the pandemic. And, I think there's been quite a bit of research out there that has touched upon lots of interesting things, especially the shift to digital and, how much that's all been accelerated in the past year. We wanted to come at this from a slightly different angle to really understand, again, what are those lessons that are being learned that B2B companies, B2B marketers might actually take with them even beyond the pandemic. And so we surveyed about 400 B2B executives at different companies across a range of vertical industries, all sort of having direct insight into senior level decision makers. And what we found is that the current mindset, somewhat not surprisingly, but decision making has definitely been constrained just by the current economic environment. However, what we found is that a lot of these decision makers are still seeking to make unexpected moves, especially strategic moves where they think they can really capitalize on the current environment to maybe gain some competitive advantage. We're going to dig into this a little bit more, but we found that there's a couple of interesting disconnects in terms of what B2B companies truly believe is important to be doing right now versus what they're actually doing and what they're investing in. So we think those kind of gaps are always interesting to look at. And and then finally, we found that marketing is definitely under more pressure than ever to impact revenue, to demonstrate a connection to sales, and really helping sales teams to break through with customers.
Yeah, I think just to add on, I think we saw that there was like this inherent pressure to tie spending on the direct sales impact. So we saw something, I want to say like 55 or so %. We're thinking around how do we like shift our marketing efforts to focus on existing offerings, and so wanting to make sure that they were able to directly tie to sales in a more immediate way, and they're focusing on that as opposed to 45% focusing on creating net new offerings. I think that split is interesting in that there's more time being spent right now towards what do we currently have and how do we potentially reposition some of that for the current environment as opposed to trying to think about anything net new.
Right. So, I think customers have always felt pressure. Now we're feeling it more strongly than ever. So what do you think is causing folks to move forward on initiatives? I guess what are some of the main barriers?
Yeah, I think there's a number, right? I think to your point, it's people want to move forward, but they're having these issues, and in their heads they have this in the back of their head, as Joe mentioned, like there's this pressure to maintain cash, right, and not spend too much. They also want to some degree do things that are less resource intensive around focusing on their current offering as opposed to net new offerings that might take some R&D, some effort, some research, and things like that. And some of those things are out of their control, right? Like we don't know when this will end. No one has that crystal ball. But there's a couple things that might be the case. And so as we surveyed, we saw a couple of key barriers to action. I think first and foremost, we saw there was this uncertainty around the market and the length, right? And again, that's not something we can fully control. But the other three that we highlighted here are something that's semi in our control, right? So this idea of decision overload and the paralysis that happens, the lack of consensus among senior leadership, and a lot of cross-organizational cooperation is required to move things forward. When a lot of these marketers and these B2B execs feel this, they tend to see slower sales cycles. And so these are really the key barriers, right? And we think the bottom three are more things that you have some control over, and you try to work across your org. Whereas the top one, which is obviously the most, is we don't know how long this will last. But if we can build a solid foundation internally and think about how to overcome these as a team and a company, can have a big impact.
Okay, that definitely makes sense that people are buying familiar products and focusing on preserving cash. Something that also might be a barrier a little bit is just that the decision-making process, there are now so many people involved. It's not just one person. It's, like I think on average, like around 5 to 7 people. And it's not just the C-suite or the people that necessarily are holding the budget, but it's also like the end users that are influencing up. So I'm curious of how else B2B companies are adapting and what they're doing in reaction.
Joe, you want to take that or?
Yeah, well, so there's a number of things that kind of bubbled to the top there, Alex. And number one was that 84% of the B2B executives that we surveyed said that a top priority was really strengthening their position in the marketplace as being really a trusted thought leader. Somebody that's capable of solving timely customer challenges and, really just being there for their customers, demonstrating that they're there with, some kind of value that can help them succeed during the pandemic. It's interesting and I think a little bit surprising maybe that 72% of those we surveyed said that it was really important to increase their communications with customers around that kind of expertise and how they can help their own customers protect and grow their sales. And then we also found, this was also somewhat surprising to me at least, is that strengthening the understanding of the buyer's customer. So, in B2B, obviously we talk a lot about understanding the customer need, the customer pain point. what we don't often talk about as much is understanding the customer's customer. And I think that one of the reasons that this, bubbled to the top was that, the pandemic, as it began, it was, very much, sort of directly impacting consumers, but it was still a little bit difficult to tell what that ripple effect might be on B2B companies, on supply chains, et cetera. And so, as time has gone on, obviously, most, if not all, companies have been impacted by this in some way, but there is unevenness across different vertical industries, where some are really booming, areas in enterprise technology really thriving, whereas, maybe an obvious example would be hospitality and travel, still really struggling. And so this notion of really needing to understand ultimately, yes, your customer, but the customer's customer, to know sort of where your buyer's head is at, was a really interesting insight that bubbled to the top for us.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, as we think about that, Joe, you and I have talked about this a lot, but we're trying to think about how to put that into practicality, and it's really around that idea of understanding what the effect is and how everyone's dealing with this. And I think to your point, even though like in a vast generalization of like technology tends to be doing well, right? And that's what we see too, is that technology companies as a whole are doing well. If you dig in a little deeper into those pockets, there's probably a little bit of a difference between there's a huge difference actually between a huge enterprise technology company versus a SMB that's trying to up and come and get net new, right? And that goes back to this idea of people are unsure of going after new things and want to focus on what they know well. And so those that are known well and known entities, and it actually makes it even harder to take sometimes risks right now. And so it's really important that, although you want to make the right decision, you want to think about, am I thinking about this in the long term? And am I making a decision that, it's going to help me not just now, but potentially in the mid to longer term as well is really important.
Yeah. And I should point out that there were actually, going back to these disconnects that really tend to attract our attention when we do this kind of research. But we also found that there was this shortfall between belief and action. And, so going to this idea of understanding the customer's customer, there were a lot more of the respondents said that they believed that was important to do, versus those who were actually taking action on that and investing in, sort of better understanding the buyer's customer. What we found is that there was actually about a 23% gap between those two statements. There was also another shortfall in this around the question of redefining mission, purpose, and offerings to help aid clients to emerge from the pandemic as well as those customers possibly can. So 52% of those we surveyed said that this was a high priority in terms of engaging with customers in this moment. But there was about 11% gap between those who believe that that's important versus those who are actually taking action and investing in actually making this sort of repositioning around the offerings and purpose. So, smaller gaps in a couple of other areas, as I mentioned before, increasing communications. A lot of companies are investing in that. Which ironically means that to stand out now is probably even more competitive than it was prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like, as we saw in the previous slide, I was just shown in the one before, to Joe's point, we're always looking for those gaps because it feels like that's an opportunity area, right? So B2B execs, whether they're talking about themselves or others, are craving doing those things, but in reality, not a lot of people are doing it. So that feels like a potential place where if you think that redefining your mission, for example, or redefining your offering is something worthwhile, not just for now, but for the longer term, it's probably worth investing because people are craving that from their suppliers and their vendors and their consultants. And so kind of find those key opportunities there, because as Joe said, now more than ever, it's really, it's getting more and more difficult to stand out in the crowd.
Right. Did you guys explore why you think there is that gap and what kind of impact it has on marketing, maybe long-term and short-term?
Yeah, so I don't think we dug super deep into it, but we have some ideas on why, right? It goes back to this idea of preserving cash. Everyone's a little bit nervous around, do I make a big move now? Do I not? I think, when we first, if I know there's a global audience, but if when we first think of the US when this all started, and it was like, I think early to mid-February where it started happening and then just kind of blew out, we all thought, well, maybe in like April we'll be back in the office. No, maybe June, maybe July. And now we're in October and I don't even know if in January I'll be back in the office, right? And so there's that uncertainty that I talked about before is constantly existing. And I think that's just underlying why people are afraid to make any sort of bigger decision. They know that at some point they need to, but they've just been, to some degree, it's not wanting to always be the first one to make that move and trying to think that through. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I think, again, sort of going with this mindset of it all comes back to the customer and having a really timely and strong understanding of what's going on in their minds. I think that because I talked about that disconnect between knowing the customer and their customer, and how there was a bit of a shortfall there. Well, I think that just kind of has this knock-on effect of probably contributing to some of that indecisiveness that Tusar was talking about. So if you don't feel that you have a really firm grasp on what customers need and what will they benefit from, what's going to help move the needle for them and for you, I think that just kind of contributes to some of that, the indecision and probably some of the indecision around making investments and taking action.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I know, Joe, you and I have talked about this a lot, but we thought about, in general, when this all happened, it came out, it first affected consumers, right? And we're all consumers, whether we're buying for business or not, but it really affected that B2C space. And it's slowly starting to, B2B was a little bit insulated from it. We weren't sure how long it would last. So it would continue to go. And so people were like, well, let's wait it out a little bit. And so we're now starting to see that there's a need to move forward with whatever happens, whether we're all back in January or we're all at this stage of working from all these different places for for some of next year too, right? We need to just adjust and we need to start thinking. So I think my prediction is we'll start to see action happening going into the next year. It's just that it took time. Keep in mind we did this survey, I want to say June-ish, right? And so it's a time period that people were thinking about, how do I think about the next 3 to 6-ish months and what can I do going forward?
Yeah, these are all good things to know. I want to move on to the 5 strategies to make sure we have enough time to dive into those, and then to make sure we have enough time for all the questions that we're getting in. So, what do these findings mean for B2B marketers' decision making in the new COVID-driven context? What are the 5 new engagement strategies or areas of opportunity that marketers can really zero in on?
Yeah, so I think I'll start. There was, as you mentioned, there were 5 that we really found from this research. As we went through, we understood what those gaps were, those shortfalls, and there were 5 key things that we saw as potential strategy to go forward. I think first might be a little bit on the obvious side, but it's really just that positioning for the long term, right? We saw that astute B2B marketers recognize this as an opportunity to think about how can they think about their mission, their offering, their products, their services. How do they think about that in the longer term, and what does that mean? How does that help their customers? Ultimately, and it's been like this for a while. It's not about just that initial sale. It's about being that consultant to your customer and making sure that your offerings can help them both now, but also in the longer term, wherever we are in another 9, 12 months to 2 years even. Joe, I don't know if you want to go on a couple.
Well, I was just going to sort of comment on the next one we wanted to share, which is, again, around this idea of knowing the customer and their customers. So we've kind of teed up that concept, but, nuts and bolts, what does that mean? What can people actually be doing about that? Well, there's a couple of things. So one is really revisiting your efforts around customer segmentation. This is going to be, there's a lot of diversity within B2B and everyone's kind of being affected a little bit differently. But what we would say is that for companies that really have a diverse portfolio of customers, especially customers that may be experiencing, the pandemic in different ways, it's really vital in this moment for marketing to take the lead and to, at minimum, sort of refresh your efforts around customer segmentation to understand, what are the best ways to be allocating marketing efforts and resources towards the greatest revenue potential. And also, communicating with sales to understand, what are some of those insights that are going to help inform, the positioning of what you have to offer in really timely and meaningful ways. And just lastly on that, I would say, like in the environment right now where sort of customer churn and losing customers can really have an outsized impact, that these are all things that can absolutely contribute to actually retaining customers and helping improve customer satisfaction to help prevent that challenge as well.
Yeah, and I think Joe, to that point, just to dig a little deeper, I think in the knowing your customers, to go back there for a second. Like, I know you and I had talked about what does that really mean. I know you had, like, we had this example, I think, of an oil company, and maybe you can go into more detail on it, but just this idea of being able to, like, it was a supplier to airlines, so B2B company, but they were thinking about how can we help airlines right now, especially in this time, and what they're thinking about is, like, how do we think about how planes are repositioned and thought about and travel happens? And although they were viewed typically as like the energy supplier for the airlines, it was a matter of thinking around how does my customer, the airline, think about their end customer, which is you and I traveling, right? So I think, to put in a little bit of perspective of how we think beyond just that initial customer, right?
Yeah, no, you totally captured it. And, just to kind of boil that down, it really is all about understanding what customers and prospects are most likely and sort of able to pay attention to right now. And if they're in a situation where, they're experiencing, real hardship and just highly focused on a particular set of challenges, then it's kind of incumbent upon marketers and communicators to appreciate that about their customers and to, perhaps pivot how they're both communicating and even potentially sort of presenting their offering to customers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think your other point around the revolving around the customer journey is important too, right? Being able to not just think about the lead gen aspect, but what's that overall journey? How do we revolve around that? How do we earn effectively? I think you were saying around, like, earning that permission to sell is super important.
Yeah. So earning the permission to sell is something that comes up a lot in our work for clients. And while this idea of sort of customer engagement barriers and collaboration between sales and marketing, it's definitely not new. However, what we found in the study is that a lot of these issues are really being magnified or have been magnified so far this year. And so, more than ever, what marketers need to be doing is kind of reaching out to their sales teams and understanding at a real in the trenches kind of level, what are those challenges that you're having engaging with customers? Where in the customer journey does that happen? And, what do we need to do? What do we need to change in order to truly win those touch points in the journey that are critical? And that could be high funnel, it could be middle, it could be low, it could be even post-purchase. And so, Tusar, to your point, it's not just about, let's say, generating the MQL. There might be things that could be done on customer retention and satisfaction where marketing can really contribute to strengthening those relationships. So, this is something that we see is going to be really critical for the foreseeable future. I would say, especially as physical events and trade shows, may not be coming back at least until, the vaccine is sort of widely out there. And so that means that decision makers are turning to content. They're turning to kind of what they find online. They're turning to digital experiences. And these are really all areas where marketing can help lead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that goes into that, like, I'd say the fourth idea of the stronger sales and marketing collaboration around that idea of the need to work strongly together, because if I'm a salesperson, I can't go and meet someone at a trade show or talk to someone or have that in-person meeting. So the need for communications and sales to work hand in hand with marketing is really important to help achieve ultimately the customer outcomes they're trying to get.
Yeah, and then, just kind of the final idea that I think we were going to touch on was, aspiring to really earn thought leadership and the trust of customers. Again, not an entirely new concept. Obviously, we've been looking at this topic for 3 years, but one of the reasons this is more important now, we believe, than it ever has been, is because this is just a major period of disruption. As we've been talking about, different companies, and just actual people are really dealing with a lot of hardship. And, that includes some of the decision makers that we talk to, who in many cases are somewhat worried about even their own job security on a personal level. And so, what that all adds up to is just a major period of change where, depending upon how you look at it, leading brands can kind of step into this moment, not shrink away from the moment, but actually elevate their communications, commit to doing, stronger communications where you really provide value to the target audience. And we believe that adds up to trust that can help strengthen your existing relationships, as well as really kind of, sow the seeds for down the road once a recovery hopefully begins to, come into play. Those relationships will pay off in the end as well.
Yeah. So just to recap, the 5 were: position for the long term, know your customer's customer, revolve around the customer journey. And I love that concept of, needing to earn the permission to sell. 4, stronger sales and marketing collaboration. And 5, earn trust through thought leadership. And I just wanted to follow up quickly on thought leadership a bit more and see if you have any additional actionable insights or advice on how to create meaningful thought leadership content.
Yeah, Alex, that was good. That was like a photographic memory right there. Very impressive to just go through.
No, that's why we host the show.
Yeah, exactly. No, so to your last point, I know we want to get to questions too, so we'll try to be a little quick here. But one of the things that we saw from all our research was marketers love the research. They understand the value of thought leadership, but then they want to know, how do I actually take this and put it into action? And so spoke a lot with Joe and his team at Edelman to try to understand what's the type of framework we can build out. And so what they were able to create with this idea of this Edelman thought leadership flywheel, basically. And this idea is, how do we think about, what are the 6 different areas we can think about in terms of where we should focus on to create content that's of quality that really helps the end, helps the customer and helps the prospect, if you will. I don't know, Joe, do you want to maybe walk through a couple and I can walk through a couple?
Yeah, I know we're going to go quickly, so we'll just kind of whip around here. But, kind of beginning with this idea of capitalizing on white space. This is all about finding the right kinds of opportunities where your company can truly, lead and ideally even own a conversation that's timely and meaningful for your customers. And, kind of in addition, what I would say is that, approaching that white space typically from a contrarian or an unexpected angle is a good way of kind of setting yourself up to really break through, as well as being bold and imaginative in your company's storytelling. The next sort of idea here in the flywheel is around relevance, which I know probably sounds terribly obvious, but again, going back to some of what we talked about around just truly getting inside the mind of the customer, and customizing everything that you do. And so a lot of companies tend to fall into this trap of trying to be everything to everyone when they, publish content. And so, for us, this means, again, just getting those in the trenches kinds of insights that will inform how you communicate, as well as on the marketing technology side, embrace the tools that can really kind of fuel a highly customized, highly targeted approach to both your creative and your editorial strategy. And then, demonstrating a vision, easier said than done, I think. But, buyers that we've talked to over the course of 3 years now, especially the senior level buyers, more so than the mid-level decision makers, but definitely C-suite and senior buyers, they want to know where the industry is going. And so you kind of have to take it beyond just explaining, the what behind a trend, but push further to explain why. Help uncover what's next for your customers and what that means for them. And ultimately, what that's going to add up to is big picture thinking, big picture ideas that will help to really condition that selling environment.
Great. Yeah, this flywheel is amazing. There's more about it in the full report, which we'll share a link to later. But I do want to make sure that we have time for questions because we have a lot of great ones that came in. So with that, we will move into Q&A. So the first question comes from Philip, and he's asking, how does one break through all of the noise decision makers have to deal with in terms of, email, social media posts, etc.? So how do you stand out from the noise? And I think this question is super relevant, especially now that everyone is online and there's kind of like a content overload of sorts.
Yeah, I can start maybe, Joe, and then if you want to add it. I think that framework that Joe was just walking through provides a little bit of that detail of how to think about coming up with that analysis of the white space, understand how not to be that noise. We actually have a whole module on that if you go to this site that Alex will give you at the end to talk about how to avoid being part of the white noise and being actually in the space that's relevant, right? So making sure that you're relevant for your customer base, you're able to provide something that helps them answer. Remember that the fundamental question they're trying to figure out is, well, two fundamental questions are, one, how do I get better at my job? And two, why is something happening? What's the underlying cause? If you're answering those questions for what's going on in your industry, more than likely you're providing value to the decision maker. Along with that, one of the key attributes we show in that flywheel was brevity. You might have seen, and it's important to make sure that when you're coming up with the content, you have little bits and snippets so that people can, they're not just going to read a 20-page white paper, right, or a full ebook. It's important to get the key pieces of information out, and how do you attract them to want to learn more and read more, and make sure that you're providing relevant information in a quick manner so that they can spend that time to really focus on reading in on what you're doing and what's kind of happening.
Right. Completely agree there. We will move on to the next question from Christina. And she's asking, is SEO still a big deal when it comes to creating high quality content for websites?
Yeah, I would say SEO absolutely is, still important for B2B companies. I think and I'm just going to read into the question a little bit, but I think what marketers want to be doing is really paying attention to, around particular offerings or particular objectives. Is SEO the right tool for you in that particular use case? And so, even going beyond things like search engine marketing and some of the more, some of the aspects that are more paid for versus organic, I think you need to understand, is it focused enough for the particular audience that you're trying to draw in and communicate with, or maybe it's too blunt of a tool based on your objectives. So it's hard to give sort of one blanket answer to that, but I would say, of course, SEO is important because everybody, spends so much time in search engines, but you really want to look at the particular use case and the goals you're trying to accomplish to see where SEO fits into, that particular scenario.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. SEO is still very important. All right, there are a couple of questions about video. More and more companies are switching to video rather than written communication. And then, so is the written word rapidly dying when it comes to communicating quality content?
So I don't think that it's rapidly dying. I don't think it's an either or, right? These are all different mediums to get it out there. There's the foundation of what you're building. There's a way that people are going to want to consume it in their own way. But you need to meet people how they want to be met, right? And so here's an example. We're in video. We're talking about the report. We're providing you some key examples. We're not able to go through the full report. If you give us an hour of your time, we're still not able to go through it. So for those that are interested in learning more, they'll spend that time going into the written full report. They'll go to the website. I think it's important that you have multiple mediums that you put the data out there in. Again, that goes back to that brevity point of being able to have key pieces of information to draw the people in to want to learn more about it. You can't just give them, again, that 20-page white paper and expect everyone to read it, right? There's some set of people that will. There's some set of people that want the highlights, and there's someone in between that is interested, and then we'll spend time later on learning about it. And so it's important that you have a multimedia strategy of how you get that information out there to do that.
Yeah, and I would just underline one point that you touched on there too, Sarah, which is using video to explain something that may be highly complex. And we know that a lot of the B2B clients that we work with are dealing with technologies, solutions, offerings that in some cases are quite complicated. And so video can be an incredible tool for boiling that down, conveying what you need to in a very sort of concise way. Absolutely can be complementary to things like longer white papers and the like, but just knowing how much people are on mobile devices and looking for quick snippets of information. If you are a company that has to communicate highly complex ideas, would definitely recommend that you look at using video for that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's unrealistic to think that your audience is, all the same, wants to consume content all in the same way. So it's super important to have a bunch of different formats within your strategy. All right, this is a question that we touched on a little bit, but I think it's kind of coming up as a common theme throughout both the LinkedIn Live feed and then the Slido feed. So how would you approach the business case for doing thought leadership the right way in the face of short-term lead gen and fast production expectations?
Yeah, I think that's a complex but very good question to understand. Like, how do you, again, achieve those short-term goals? We'll think about the long-term. And I think you want to make sure that you're in an ideal situation, and you can't go back, obviously, but you're spending time to build some sort of franchise or some sort of key content pace and try to keep building on it, right, as we just discussed before. So ideally, you're not necessarily creating a completely net new, but you can build on something you've done before that can help achieve some of that short-term goal and that long-term. But if you can't, that's okay too. Then we just got to think about how do we plan so that we can do something on a shorter note now and then do something longer. I'll give you a real life example of this actual study, right? So in general, Joe and I work every year for the past 3 years to build out and understand how do we think about thought leadership, how are marketers thinking about thought leadership. And we try to survey around the world to several thousand people, analyze that, come up with a full report, and then think about how do we get that out there. In this situation, we wanted to do something that was short term in terms of thinking about how people are being impacted right now in the next few months and understand how COVID is impacting. It wasn't possible to do a long-term, big, multi-thousand, multi-country piece in such a rapid time. So we found new net ways to do something on a smaller scale, still understand the pulse of the market, and focus on a couple key areas that we had hypotheses on that we wanted to explore deeper. And so it's a matter of taking that bigger idea, push that for the long term, but then think about the smaller chunks you can do and can do in a reasonable time frame to get out. I don't know, Joe, if you would agree with that or maybe have a different thought.
Yeah, I would just maybe wrap that by saying there's, as you think about strategically where you want to go in the future, try and break down into smaller pieces, the different insights, the different accomplishments that you're going to need to eventually, build your way to that longer term sort of strategic, vision. And so what that might mean practically is if you're trying to, do a better job of actually, targeting your distribution, begin to experiment with something like account-based marketing and just simply see, are we doing a better job of actually getting to the right kinds of companies, the right sorts of decision makers? If what you're looking to do is, do something that is more heavily weighted toward accelerating the pipeline, maybe you begin to experiment around more creative calls to action or, providing more incentive to drive the engagement that you want. And there's a bunch of things kind of in between there. But what I would say is, breaking it down into sort of smaller, manageable things that you can begin to experiment with, demonstrate success, and then make the case for investment internally, we found is a good way of approaching that.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And with that, I know we're a little bit over. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to our audience for tuning in and being so engaged and sending amazing questions throughout the broadcast. We hope that you learned something today to take back to your team. And if you want to check out the full report of how it's entitled, How B2B Companies Are Adapting Customer Engagement Strategies During COVID, there should be a short link appearing at the bottom of the screen right now for you to go and check it out. There it is. And of course, thank you to our guests, to FAR, And Joe, it was an honor speaking with you guys today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks so much, everyone.
Of course, and our next Live with Marketers is actually on November 17th, and we'll cover why account-based marketing is alive, well, and essential to an effective B2B marketing strategy. One last plug as a reminder to please, if you're on the Slido experience, please fill out the survey so that we can get your feedback and incorporate that into our next broadcast. So until next time, take care, everyone.